Can you turn to Luke chapter 10, verse 25? In your pew Bibles, it's on page 735. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Susie. Well, this is an important Sunday for us as a congregation. This is the first Sunday without Barton here, and for 13 years we've followed Barton. We've listened to him share from the Word, standing here, and you know what? In a lot of senses, a lot of things are changing for us. But in another deeper and way more important sense, nothing is changing for us. See, for 83 years, I think it was 83 years. Of course, we didn't have this particular spot, but for 83 years, people have stood up here and they've pointed to someone else. They've pointed to a person who perfectly incarnated what God is like. They pointed to someone who perfectly loved their neighbors. They pointed to Jesus. And that is not going to stop anytime soon. That we are going to point to Jesus. It's not one leader, it's our Savior that we're looking to. And this Sunday, we're starting a new sermon series. We're calling it Questioning Jesus, and we're looking at a variety of questions that Jesus was asked. And the basic principle is this, is that people are people. Okay, we ask the same questions, we have the same struggles, we have the same issues as other people. And so the questions that Jesus was asked, they're also questions that we're asking. They're questions that our friends are asking and other people are asking. So this morning we're looking at a passage that I think is quite familiar to most of us. And but I think maybe we'll be able to approach it a little bit differently, from a little bit of a different angle than we usually do. So I'll get into it in a minute, but we're going to see that the question that this man asks is basically, what do I need to do? What do I do? Okay, he says the actual words. The actual words he says is, "Who is my neighbor?" And that's why we have the sermon title, "Who is my neighbor?" or "What do I have to do?" But that's essentially the question that he's asking. And that's a question that a lot of us ask. Because most of our university students are away, I'll pick on them. I know that come exam season, they spend time when they should be studying for their exams trying to figure out the exact percentage that they need in order to pass the course, right? And some of you remember doing that. But you know what? More people I know ask this question a little bit differently. They are successful. But the more that they gain success, the more that they exceed and excel in whatever area that they have put their mind to, they realize that it doesn't feel like they expected it to feel. So then they set the bar higher, and they meet that, and they set the bar higher, and they meet that. And eventually they're left wondering, well, what more do I have to do? What more do I have to do? And you know what? If you talk to Madonna, if you talk to Michael Jordan, if you talk to, well, you can't talk to J.D. Rockefeller, but if you could go back in time and you talk to him, you know his famous quote, how much money do you need to just another dollar, just a little bit more? They'll all tell you that no matter how much money you earn, no matter how many championships you win, no matter how many people are screaming your name, it's just not enough. And we're left asking, what do I have to do? How much more do I have to achieve? You know, last week, a Facebook friend of mine posted one of those Instagrams, you know, the nice picture and the inspirational message. And this is what it said. It said, at the end of the night, before you close your eyes, be content with what you've done and be proud of who you are. Oh, that's so inspirational. So sweet. This never happens for me. How often do you lay down at night and you can say this of you? It's a nice thought, but we can't usually say this. How many evenings can you do this? How many times can you lay awake just waiting to drift off into your sleep and say, did I really do enough today to be content? Am I really enough to be proud of? And that, I think, is a question that a lot of us ask, and that is the question that Jesus was asked. So this morning we're going to take a closer look at this question and Jesus' approach. In order to do that, we're going to look at four things. We're going to look at the trap, the tale, the teaching, and the truth. The trap, the tale, the teaching, and the truth. First, the trap. Now, to understand Jesus' response to this story, the story he tells of the Good Samaritan and all that, we need to back up to the beginning of Jesus' interaction with this person. And Luke identifies, if you look in verse 25, that this person is an expert in the law. And we hear that and we think, oh, maybe we think of civil law. Maybe he's a lawyer or a law professor or something like that. But those hearing this story would know that the man is an expert in religious law. He's a religious scholar. Okay, and when we take a closer look, we notice that this religious scholar actually asks two questions. In again, later in verse 25, the first question he asks is, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What must I do to inherit eternal life, to gain eternal life? And why is he asking that? Well, the text tells us that he stood up to test Jesus. He stood up to trap Jesus. He's trying to trap Jesus, not us, sorry. He's trying to trap Jesus, but how is this question, what must I do to inherit eternal life, a trap? We need to understand that Jesus in his ministry, we'll go back to the expert in the law. He was basing his entire life that he could earn God's favor and God's merit by living a life that was pure and holy. That's not a terrible assumption, but that's what he based his entire life on. But then comes Jesus, and Jesus is teaching, basically, he's hanging out with people that the religious scholar says, oh, those are dirty sinners, those are vile people, those people are the furthest away from God. And yet Jesus is telling them that they can inherit the kingdom of heaven. You see, he's basically cutting off this religious scholar's whole worldview by hanging out with these sinners and these tax collectors. See, the religious scholar is saying that he wants to gain eternal life. Eternal life doesn't just mean life forever. It means life as it is meant to be. Okay, life as it is meant to be. And if you know a little bit about Jewish history and a society, a civilization that in over 500 years experienced a few months and a few short seasons of self-rule, life as it is meant to be sounds pretty attractive. That is what he desires. That's what he's going after. And he knows the only way that you can experience life as it is meant to be is if you're perfect. It's not a bad assumption. We know that the only cars that run perfectly are cars that are perfectly maintained according to the manufacturer's specifications. So if God created us and he created life, then the only way to experience life as it is meant to be is to obey God perfectly. So this religious scholar comes to Jesus and they're looking at Jesus and they're saying, this guy is, at best, he's a false teacher. At worst, he's a heretic because he's saying that these dirty sinners can experience life as it is meant to be. They do not, Jesus does not hold God's law with much esteem at all. Jesus doesn't care anything about God's law. And it's undermining the entire approach to life that this religious scholar has. So then, he comes to Jesus, and he wants to prove that Jesus doesn't care about God's law. So he asks this question: what must I do to inherit eternal life? And I think he's expecting Jesus to have some fluff answer. But how does Jesus respond? Verse 26. What is written in the law? He replies, how do you read it? What's Jesus saying there? He's saying, well, I believe in the law of God. I hold the law of God. I think that it all applies. Now, what does it say? Summarize it for me. And this guy is beginning to wonder, well, what is Jesus doing? So he responds just like other religious scholars of the day. The guy didn't make this up. In fact, Jesus elsewhere gives this exact same answer as a summary of the law. And he answers quoting two commandments. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if you obey these two commandments, you'll obey all of the law of God. And then look what Jesus does. He's beginning to turn the trap the man is setting on him, on the man himself, on the religious scholar. He says, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. So what Jesus is doing is he's helping the man to see the trap that the man has put himself in, where he is basing his life on following the law of God, and he doesn't even realize how much it entails. Because what does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind? I'll tell you what it means. It means that when your mind has nothing else to do, when you're stuck in a waiting room and for some reason you don't have your phone, what does your mind dwell on? When you are free to determine your own actions, what do you do? What do you think about? What do you dwell on? Are you planning your next dream vacation? Are you trying to decide which free agent the Canucks should sign? What are you doing when your mind is free? Is it dwelling on God? I don't think so. And loving the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind means that every neuron that fires, every molecule in your being, every cell in your muscles, everything that those do are dedicated towards God's glory and his purposes and his plan. And that makes sense. If God created us, then he deserves everything from us, that every breath, every protein, every aspect of us is dedicated to him. But it isn't, is it? I hope you all realize that we are all light years. I don't know what bigger measurement than light years. We are all, whatever it is, we are all infinitely far from fulfilling this commandment. And this is only the first one. The guy gives two, and this is just the first one. What's the second one? Love your neighbor as yourself. Do you know what it means to love your neighbor as yourself? When I was growing up, I used to entertain myself on road trips by realizing, I was going to say imagining, but the real word is realizing that all the people in all the cars that we were driving by were real people. Like they were going somewhere. Like they had a life and they had friends. They weren't just some background or bit characters in the grand narrative of Kyle. We're not in the Matrix and all of you are fake and I'm the only one that's real. It's not how it is. Everybody's real. But have you tried living your life? Maybe it's just me and I'm just weird, but have you tried, like, as you walk and interact with people or you drive by them or you're stuck in traffic and be like, that's a real person there. They have all the thoughts that I have in my mind. They have in their mind too. So loving your neighbor means that you are spending as much time dwelling on others' thoughts and thinking of them and all of that as you do yourself. But not just thinking about them, but also that you are putting as much energy, as much effort, as much thought and dedication into fulfilling their needs as you are in fulfilling your own needs. That you have as much invested in their happiness as you do in your happiness, so that whatever you do for you to fill your needs, to make you happy, anything like that you're not just doing that for you, but then you are also doing it for them. You see how impossible this is? Do you see how Jesus is turning the trap on this guy? He's saying, okay, good, I'm Mr. Expert in the law, you're right, this is what the law says. And you know what, I take it seriously, but you don't. Because you think that you can do this. You think that you can fulfill the law of God. And sometimes it's nice when you're an expert in the law and you know all the, 700 commandments or something, and you're pretty good at fulfilling 500 of them. You're like, hey, that's a passing grade. That's great. Let me calculate the percentage that I need to do, right? But when you boil it down to just two and you realize how impossible it is to live as God has called us to live, then you need to do exactly what the man does next. You see, he's beginning to realize that Jesus is turning this trap on him. And verse 29 says, but he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? He wanted to justify himself. Do you know what it means to justify yourself? Actually, I wasn't really waiting for an answer, but what it means to justify yourself is it means to meet the standard. Okay, it means that you are trying to meet the standard. That's what justify means. And what do you do if you know you can't meet the standard? You change the standard. So that's what this guy's trying to do. He's like, oh, I realize, Jesus, I can't, I thought you were going to give me some easy answer and that you didn't care about the law of God, but it turns out you care about it way more than I do, and I can't fulfill what you're calling me to do, so I need to change the standard. Now, the question he asks is not going to go far enough to do that, but what he's trying to do is limit who we need to love. Okay, this is where the question comes in. He's asking, who is my neighbor? But really, he's asking, well, how much do I need to do to accomplish what you say I need to do? What's the bare minimum? What's the minimum standard? What do I need to do? Okay, he's trying to find a way out. He's trying to find a way that he can meet this standard. And he realizes that he can't possibly do it. You know what? We all find ourselves in this trap. Remember the Facebook comment? At the end of the night? Night? Oh, I thought it would say day. Anyway, at the end of the night, before you close your eyes and be content with what you've done and be proud of who you are. Now, why would this even be a post? Why would someone put that? Because most of us have unrealistic expectations placed on us in our lives. They're either from others or they're from ourselves. And you know what? Very often we don't meet those standards. And for some of us, it destroys us. Actually, you know what? At some point for all of us, it destroys us. Because either we destroy ourselves trying to meet the standard, and we burn out at work, or whatever it is that we see as the standard we need to meet, and we burn out trying to meet it, or we realize we can't, and we collapse on ourselves. And these standards destroy us. But is this post the answer to that? If we have standards that are on us that we can't meet? What if I lay down at night and I say, oh, you know what? I'm not proud of who I am. Should I just ignore that thought? Or should I just keep lowering that standard until I don't have a standard on me at all anymore? Like, oh, yeah, that sermon was not as good as Barton's. Well, that's unrealistic of me. I can't. Why would I set that standard so high on myself? I'll just lower it a little bit down. Let's just get to Wesley's standard. Sorry, Wesley. In my mind, that was a compliment to you, but I know it came out kind of negative. So, sorry about that. And you keep going until I get to the point where, like, you know what? Life doesn't matter. There's no standard anymore. That's not the answer. What do you do? What happens to people when they take away their standards completely, when they take away their what they're living for and the reason that they live? They implode on themselves. Right? And we see this in life, that if the answer isn't just keep lowering and lowering and lowering and lowering the standards, because then eventually you wake up in the morning and you say, well, I have no standard to live up to. I have nothing to do. I'm nothing. There's nothing that gives me meaning. And then you live your life for nothing. And it just destroys us. So the answer isn't to get rid of our standard entirely. And Jesus is showing us that we're all stuck in this trap. We're all stuck in this trap where we need to justify ourselves. And in order to do that, we try and change the scales to meet the standard. And so this man asks, who is my neighbor? Our question might be different, but essentially we're asking the same thing. What do I need to do? So that's the trap. And then Jesus tells a story, a tale. Now, Jesus' answers to questions are very interesting. He never seems to answer a question directly. We'll find that out a lot as we go through this series. And here, Jesus doesn't answer this man's question directly. Instead, he tells a story. There's this man, and he was going on a trip from Jerusalem to Jericho. And everybody listening would know this particular road. It's a relatively short, but it's a dangerous trip. It's in a valley, through a valley, and all over are caves and hideouts that robbers can and did hide in. And of course, the man gets attacked, he gets beaten, he gets robbed, he has nothing, and he's left for dead laying on the road. And he's nothing, he can't help himself, and if without outside intervention, he's just going to lay there and die. But wait, there's hope. First, a priest, and then a Levite. That's basically a religious scholar from the part of the Jewish family that had the priest. So it's someone who knew the law and was a righteous person. So the priest and a Levite, one at a time, come, and they walk up to the man, and they look at him, and they go across the road as far away as they can from him and walk the other side. And why do they do that? Well, as they see the man, there's really two options. One, he's dead, in which case, these are religious people. If they touch the dead body, they're unclean. They're ceremonially unclean, and they need to purify themselves again. So that's option one. He's dead, and he'll make them unclean. Option two, he's not dead yet. And what does that mean? Who watches crime shows? He's not dead yet. The robbers are close by. In fact, maybe they're waiting right behind this rock. They're going to get a 2-for-1 deal. Okay, so they walk by because they're trying to protect their religious purity, their reputation, or their own safety. And just as the sting of the two hopeful heroes walking by and not helping out sets in, the man with his one bruised eye open looks and he sees two other feet come into view. But these aren't Jewish feet. They're the feet of a Samaritan. Now, many of you know that the Jews and the Samaritans had a long-standing hatred. I won't get into all the details right now, but basically the Jews and the Samaritans had the same background, but the Samaritans were seen as ethnically impure, and they were theologically impure. They were basically heretics. They were people like the Jews, living close to the Jews, but seen as worse and terrible, and they weren't accepted, and the feeling was mutual. Okay, and so what Jesus does here is we would expect the Samaritan is just going to walk by. He's not going to be better than the priest and the Levite, the upper echelon of Jewish culture. You're not going to look to some outsider and they're going to do better. But Jesus throws us a curveball. And you know what, as an aside, that's what parables are. They're like serious jokes that teach a truth, okay? And in a joke, you have the cliche setup, and then boom, the punchline hits you in the funny bone. Well, parables are like that, except it's not a punch in the funny bone, it's a punch in the gut. You're like, oh, ow, what's going on? And so when we expect this Samaritan to just go on by, because we don't want him to help, and he doesn't want to help, but then that's not how Jesus tells the story. He punches us in the gut, and he says, wake up, I want to teach you something, I want to show you something. And we go, what? What's going on? Why is this man helping him? Because these aren't just two guys in a spat, okay? It's not like a Samaritan helping a Jew isn't like an Oilers fan helping a Canucks fan, okay? It's not like a little rivalry. It's not an American helping a Canadian or it's not a little rivalry. The Samaritan stopping to help this Jew is like a Jewish man hiding out in Nazi Germany who stops to help a Nazi officer lying wounded in a ditch. It's unrealistic. Nobody does that. That's ridiculous. Why would you do that? It's like a gay man stopping to help a protester who is holding a sign that insinuates that God hates gay people and helping him. Or it's like a black Christian in the South stopping to perform CPR on a man who burned himself when he was setting a church on fire. Okay, this isn't a little rivalry that this man is crossing. Jesus is punching us in the gut hard. He's saying, why would this Samaritan stop to help this man? And we need to understand how amazing this is. And the Samaritan, look at the depths that he goes to. He doesn't just stop and be like, are you okay? I know first aid, I think. He puts the man on his donkey. He rides him into town. He sets him up in a hotel, and he pays for him. Okay, he doesn't give him the Medicaid coverage. He doesn't even give him the BC MSP coverage. He gives him the 2-tier, rich of the rich, perfect full health care option. This is the type of health care that Craig Mitten would never allow us to have because it just doesn't make sense for us to provide that level of care. Craig and I used to be friends. Now he views me I'm not going to have a lot of friends by the end. I'm trying to make myself out to be the Samaritan so you understand how far you have to cross these boundaries. And the sound guys are like, I don't know where he is because he's not following his script anymore. I'm sorry. But you need to understand how far this Samaritan goes. Remember the priest and the Levite, they didn't want to put their safety at risk. The Samaritan does. They want to put their reputation at risk. The Samaritan goes in, brings the guy into a hotel, and he says, you know what, take care of this man, and I'll come back and I'll pay for whatever expenses he has. He puts his his whole financial thing on he's risking it as his reputation, because he's saying that I am good for whatever this man costs you. So he's crossing all of these boundaries, and he's caring for this man completely and fully until he's fully recovered. So that's the tale that Jesus tells. But what's he trying to teach us? What's the point? There's two key things that Jesus is communicating to us about what it means to love our neighbors. First is the magnitude, and we kind of dwelt on this a little bit. I mean, everyone agrees that you should love your neighbor. Everyone thinks that it makes sense. It's hard, so we feel the need to, limit what we need to do, but we know that we should care for people. And usually we think, well, we should care for people who are like us, or they deserve it, or, at least not the people who made so many mistakes. They got themselves into that mess. We don't need to care for them. We'll care for, other people who are like us, who believe the same things as us, and things like that. But Jesus breaks all of these excuses that we have in putting the Samaritan in the story. Okay, Jesus is saying our neighbor is not just someone who is like us. It's not just someone who is in our economic class or same race as us or the same gender. Or I might even say the same gender identity as us, in today's culture. Jesus doesn't say that, but I think that he would. And it isn't just someone who believes the same thing as us. Remember, the Samaritans were seen as heretics. So this is someone who is completely different from us, and yet Jesus says that they're the neighbor. We all have this desire to limit who we think we need to love. And I've seen this in myself recently. Not too long ago, I stepped into a car to go, and I punched in my PIN number, and as I was getting ready to drive, I looked down, and there was a hoodie, in the seat that someone had left. And I looked around, and I wasn't too far from here. I was in a residential neighborhood, and there's at least a dozen houses and basement suites there. And I was like, I don't want to go knocking on all these houses being like, hey, did you lose your hoodie? Like, that would be very embarrassing, so I'm not going to do that. And besides, at that point, I punched in my PIN, so I was already paying for the car to go, so I didn't want to pay extra money too. So I started to drive off with the hoodie. I'm like, they'll track it down somehow if it's really important to them. And then if you ride car to goes, it takes a little while for the radio to kick in. And the radio kicked in, and I listened to a radio station, I'm not going to tell you which one, that I don't think a lot of people in Vancouver listen to. And that radio station came in, and I was like, the person who had the hoodie, they're like me. I should have tried harder to find out who it was. Since then, I found out that Car2Go just remembers what radio station you like, and they just put it on anyway. So it had nothing to do with who was there before. But the point remains that, when I thought that it was somebody who was like me, I felt more of a need to love them. Because we limit who we think we need to love. And Jesus says, no. Doesn't matter if they're the same as you. Doesn't matter if they believe the same thing as you. You need to love them. So Jesus shows us the magnitude, and he shows us the motivation for loving our neighbor. There's another point in what Jesus does in this story that takes us even deeper. Look with me in verse 36. Jesus finished the story, and he's asking the guy a question, the religious scholar. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Do you see the question that Jesus asked? Do you remember the question that the man asked Jesus? The religious scholar asked Jesus at the beginning? He asked, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? What did Jesus ask? Who was a neighbor? Who was a neighbor? It's not the same question. Jesus is saying, you ask me who's my neighbor. You ask me what I need to do, okay? And I'm going to tell you who's a neighbor to you. I'm going to show you that other people are a neighbor to you. I'm not going to let you ask me, what do I need to do? I'm going to say, what has been done for you? What has been done for you? He turns this whole narrative on its head, and he's providing us a motivation to love those around us, to love our neighbors unconditionally, completely, no matter what they're like. Okay, who's this story about? It's not about, we'll put it this another way. Imagine you're the religious scholar and you're listening to this story. When you're listening to a story, you're naturally looking for somebody that you identify with. So you're listening to this story and the guy gets beat up. You're like, well, I'm not him. And then you hear the priest and the Levite come, oh, maybe that's me. No, they weren't good. That's not me. Samaritan comes in. Oh, that's not me. And at the end of the story, you're like, wait a second, I was the guy. I was the guy that was attacked. And so Jesus is saying, telling this religious scholar, he's like, imagine you are the person with your head on the dirt, it bleeding out in the road, and you can't help yourself. And along comes someone completely different than you who owes you nothing, who is your enemy, and they help you. Do you see how that's different? A different question than saying, who is my neighbor? And looking and saying, what's been done for me? A few weeks after the whole sweater in the car to go incident, I was in another car to go, and then afterwards, it was a Sunday, and Sundays are crazy. So I was at home, and I was like, where's my wallet? Oh, I must have left it at the church. And I come in on Monday, and it's not there. And I'm like, oh, where is it? And then a few days later, Natasha gets a text from a friend in Langley saying, did Kyle lose his wallet? Because some weird person just Facebook messaged me and saying that they found his wallet in a car to go, and they're looking for him. So this young lady had found my wallet, looked at my driver's license, called Car to Go, and they said, well, sorry, we can't release his information because of privacy standards. So she went on Facebook, but my privacy settings wouldn't let her contact me. So she went through my friends lists and started messaging people, being like, hey, do you know this guy? I have his wallet. And so it took a week, but I finally got my wallet back. Everything in it, by the way, and so far it's been a month and my credit cards haven't been used in other ways. So either she's in a really long-term con or she was just really good at taking care of those around her. Okay, now, when I remember that, do you think that I can sit in the car to go again with a sweater or a wallet and be like, they'll track it down? No way. I can't do that because someone who didn't owe me anything has showed love and concern and care for me. And that is nowhere close to what the Samaritan did for the man who was lying dead, almost dead, on the road. And yet it still changes my heart. It gives me a motivation to care for and to love those around me. So that's what Jesus does. He flips the question. It's the religious scholar. It's us with our face in the dirt. And the Samaritan saves him because the teaching isn't just follow this example. The teaching isn't just be a good person. The teaching is remember what has been done for you. Okay? The teaching isn't just follow this example. Tim Keller, who kind of opened up this passage for me, he says, if the story was that it was a Samaritan on the road and it was the religious scholar on the donkey who saved the Samaritan, and then Jesus says, go and do likewise, be like that other person, go and do likewise. He's just giving us a do it. He's giving us a legalistic idea of what we need to do. But because it was the man, the religious scholar, who was dying on the road, and it was the Samaritan that came and crossed all the boundaries to save him, he's giving us a dynamic. He's giving us a power. He's giving us a motivation for loving our neighbors. But there's a truth of the Scriptures that this religious scholar doesn't really know about. He doesn't know about, that we do, that takes this teaching of Jesus and makes it radioactive. Okay, Jesus told a story of a Samaritan helping a Jew, a man who was from a foreign place, who had no responsibility to the man, in fact was his enemy, risked his life and his reputation when others wouldn't, to save this man who was robbed, a man who had nothing, a man who was left dying and was going to die. And he couldn't save himself. But you see, this is exactly what Jesus has done for us. Jesus came from heaven. He had no responsibility for us. We were his enemies. For while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. For while we were his enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. He not only risked his life, but he sacrificed it. He knowingly sacrificed his life and his reputation. Remember, Jesus, him who knew no sin, became sin for us so that we might become the righteousness of God. He didn't just risk his life, he willingly gave it away. For us who could do nothing, those who were not just dying, but dead. Do you remember the trap that Jesus talked about in the beginning, that we talked about in the beginning of this message? Was the trap that Jesus showed the man he was trapped in. It's a trap that we're all in, that we have a need to justify ourselves. We're trapped by a need to meet someone's standards, something standards. It's not always someone else's, sometimes it's ours. And you know what? These standards are going to eat us alive, and we're going to be lying on the road, dying, having nothing left. But Jesus, who owed us nothing, Jesus, who we made our enemy by living apart from him, got down off his steed and raised us up and brought us to health. He met the standard for us. It's not what we have to do. It's what Jesus has done for us, to rescue us from this trap that is going to crush our heads of needing to justify ourselves by God's standards, by other people's standards. Okay, at this point, it doesn't matter whose standards you're living up to. The point is that you can't live up to anybody's standards. They're going to eat you alive, and you're going to be left dying. But it's Jesus who comes and rescues us. And Jesus is saying here, no, look what I did for you. The question is not, what do I need to do? The question is, what did Jesus do for us? And the answer is that he gave up his life to rescue us from the trap. Through this, we've learned, as one person put it, that God is gracious and we don't need to prove ourselves. And God has demonstrated his graciousness through Christ coming and saving us from ourselves, from our own standards that are putting more and more weight on us and killing us. Now, some of you are asking, so I don't need to do anything then, right? Jesus did everything for me, right? I don't need to do anything. That was the question. What do I need to do? And the answer is nothing because Jesus did it for me. Great. Well, yes, that's right. You don't need to do anything because it's been done for you, but you will do things anyway. Won't you, right? Do you remember the start of this whole interaction? The teacher of the law thought that Jesus was soft, that he didn't care about the law of God because he was offering life as it is meant to be lived to all of those dirty sinners out there. And so we can't do the same thing that the teacher of the law did and say, Jesus, you've done everything. We don't need to do anything. Don't do that to Jesus. Okay, listen, if you were the man on the road and a Samaritan came and rescued you, what would you do when you heard Samaritans being bad-mouthed in the town? Be like, oh, those dirty Samaritans, we should just roll our tanks into them or something like that. You would stand up for them, right? You would say, no, I was surprised, but they're really nice people. You have this motivation to love them and to serve them because of what they have done for you. Or what if you were walking down a road and there was a man left for dead on the side of the road by robbers, and your priest friend was like, oh, we better go around to the other side because he's either dead and will be unclean, or he's not dead and will be robbed like him. You say, oh yeah, I'll just do. No, if you have been rescued from that situation, then you will see those people and you will serve them and love them just like you have been loved. And the more that we understand who we are, how dead we are in our own sin and our own desire to and need to justify ourselves, and the more we understand who Christ really is, that he has laid down his life to save us, the more that we will love our neighbors. The more that we will have that motivation to go far and beyond what we think is normal or necessary to care for those around us in whatever way that we can. And so, you know what, we're in this visioning, what we call an outward focus. We have this outward 2017 vision. And basically what that means is that what we do in here doesn't matter if it doesn't make any difference out there. What we do in here doesn't matter if it doesn't make any difference to what we do out there. So in here, you know what we do? We remind ourselves of who we are and who Jesus is. We remind ourselves of what we would be without him. We remind ourselves of what he did for us. We do that through singing. We do that through praying. We do that through listening to the word taught. And we do that through communion that we'll celebrate in a little bit. And as that gets deeper into our hearts, as we understand what Jesus has rescued us from, as we understand how far he came to save us, we will have a motivation and a love for others to serve them, to serve our neighbors, to serve everybody around us. We can go late, right? You know, this neighborhood has a whole bunch of functionally single mothers whose husbands are in China and they're raising kids by themselves. And you know what? I had a contact from Lord Bing School say, hey, could we do a partnership? Like, these are people they're in a new country, they're learning the language, and they're trying to raise their kids by themselves. And what a lot of them would really like is to have a Canadian family to partner with them and to just hang out with them and teach them about Canadian things and teach them English and help with the kids. I said, that sounds great. But I don't know who in our congregation has the time to do that. What is wrong with us? Do we not understand how far Jesus came, what he gave for us so that we can love our neighbors? We should be right on top of that. And there are probably hundreds of different opportunities that we have to make a difference in our community, to, as we say we want to do, to bring renewal to our city and world by demonstrating and declaring the transforming power of the gospel. We have dozens of opportunities to do that, but first we need to understand what has been done for us. So the question is again, what do I need to do? Nothing, because Jesus has done it all, but because he has done it all, out of a love for my neighbor and out of a love for my Savior, I want to do it all. Let's pray.